Hey, Facebook, this is Andre. We're going to try this again. I was just messing around with my mic and that kind of stuff, and it didn't go so well last time. So it's the troubles of working from home, right? So I do want to talk a little bit about this. So you want to be a diversity trainer, and this isn't just for trainers; it's for people who want to do this work, right? Or people who want to have good conversations that lead to some real positive results around diversity and inclusion. So really, we're going to spend a little time talking about that. And so you want to be a diversity trainer. One thing that would help me though is if you could give me a thumbs up if the sound quality is good, or let me know how that's working for you. That would be great. So you want to be a diversity trainer. So you want to engage in conversation. So first of all, where I start is with my definition of diversity. So I believe that diversity is about commonalities and differences, right? So how do we bring in our commonalities and our differences into the conversation at the same time, right? So what that means for me is recognizing some of my power and privilege given my diversity, right? So I typically start conversations off trying to build from the common things, the center, right? So we all have commonalities and we have differences, and those things are things that we can see and things that we can't see. And so early in my trainings and in my encounters, workshops, we really try to focus on what are those commonalities and differences and how do we talk about them. And we also talk about how the methods we use to talk about those things, because that's as important as the topic itself, right? So how we talk about diversity is as important as the topic itself. And so we go through ground rules, how to set up conversations that allow people to express themselves in the best way possible. We want to be understood and presented. So, using acronyms like ROPES, right? So responsibilities, openness to learning, participate, escuchar, listen more than do other things, and then S, have a sense of curiosity, right? So this idea of ropes, ROPES, and you can use whatever words that apply to your group or the organization you're working with, or your team for that matter. You can use any kind of acronym for that, but those are some primary things. And so that those become the ground rules by which we operate in having a conversation on diversity and inclusion. The other thing that is probably a guiding principle more so than a practice is really trying to people in the process or in the conversation around diversity and inclusion as possible. So oftentimes I'll have people in my sessions who'll come in with folded arms, with kind of this attitude, I dare you to teach me something. And so I, as a facilitator, as a trainer, have to be prepared to meet them where they are, right? So I have to be prepared to capture their sensibilities in such a way that they at least question themselves. And I would say that's one of the things that oftentimes trainers forget, is that part of our job is to get people to think critically about things, not think about things the way we do as trainers. We want them to become critical thinkers, not necessarily think the way we do. Because there could be things that we're missing, opportunities that we don't know about, but if we're giving people the tools to think critically, then we can actually move organizations in the direction of their goals, right? So there's that. The other thing is also recognizing that sometimes we bring language into the conversation that's not beneficial to the body that we're training. So it may be beneficial to me as a trainer because I can show how smart I am or how woke I am. However, if if it doesn't translate to the people that I'm training, or it creates alienation or division in what I'm trying to get across, then I'm actually not doing a good job as a trainer. So that's important to kind of recognize, that if we're so into our terminology and so into our stuff that we can't communicate effectively, then we're missing opportunities with folks. And so I'm working with my medical provider, when I'm working with my doctor, there are ways in which my doctor talks to other doctors that my physician does not talk to me. She doesn't talk to me the same way that she talks to her colleagues, right? So there are terms and ways of shorthand that they have, but when my physician talks to me, she tells me things in ways that I can understand. So sometimes she uses the terminology because she wants me to know what that terminology is. Other times she gives me information in a context where I can understand it, right? And so that's what I believe makes her a good physician, right? It makes her a good physician, that she can take these technical terms, break them down in ways that I understand, not diminishing those terms, but puts them in a context that works for me, so I can understand what she wants me to do or what I should be doing with the information that she gives me. A lot of times in trainings, that's not what happens. What typically happens is kind of social justice agenda language gets caught up in our conversations, and people sometimes leave more confused or more opposed to what we're offering than they did when we first started. And so I want us to try to avoid that as much as possible by recognizing that we need to start out with these commonalities and differences. So how do you do that, Andre? How do you start out conversation? So first thing I don't do is I don't start off talking about white privilege, right? So do I believe that white privilege exists? I certainly do. Do I believe that it is something that we should talk about? I certainly do. But I also don't think that you give your credit score on your first date, right? Like, you don't tell them whatever. Maybe that's a bad metaphor. At any rate, so when we think about, white privilege and all those things, what we want to do is think about what is the benefit of talking about that principle in the first place, and are there different ways to get to that principle, or to feed or grow my audience to a point where we can have a critical conversation about that, while bringing as many people along that conversation spectrum as I possibly can. And I believe that there is. So what I typically talk about, first of all, is what my power and privilege is. So I'm 6'2", I'm African American, I don't have a felony, I've matriculated through higher education, I'm cisgendered, I'm a conservative Christian, I am mildly attractive and extremely humble. Oh, okay. Hopefully you get the humor in the thrust of what I'm getting at, which is that some of those things are privileges that I have been born with, and others of those are privileges that I have acquired, right, through my hard work and effort. But at any rate, I have those privileges, and I can use those privileges to leverage power. Right? So I have privileges, some I was born with, some I acquired, but I can use that to leverage power. What I typically then do is have my audience also think about their privilege and their power. Now, here's where it gets sticky, because some people want to compare pain, right? So my privilege or my lack of privilege is greater than yours, or greater, I've been hurt by, or you've been advanced by. for practical purposes, we don't get into that in the early part of our sessions, right? So we really want people to think about what their power is and how, and their privilege is, and how do they use that power, and how do they use those privileges. And so if we can start there, then we can start to build towards talking about white privilege. We also recognize that this concept of privilege is contextual, right? So depending on the context that you're in, your power or your privileges gradiate on that. They're on a spectrum given the context. We know that the broadest context benefits the broadest groups of people. And the more narrow the context, the more narrow the power and privilege kind of manifests itself, right? So we really try to talk about it in those ways. Are we coddling people? People ask, why are you coddling people? It's funny. So when I taught high school on Friday, so I collected homework once a week. I collected on Friday because I gave a test that Friday. So I wanted my students to do all this work so that when I gave the test on Friday, they had all the homework they handed in, which meant that they had done the stuff for my test on Friday, right? So I collected homework on Friday, and I gave the test on Friday. So I had a good sense that okay, right? So is that coddling? I don't know. To sweeten the deal, I gave donuts to my students on Friday for turning in their homework before I gave them the test. Is that coddling? I don't know. But guess what? Before I did that, I wasn't getting any homework. Before I did that, the test scores were dismal, right? But after I started implementing those things, I was getting homework, and the homework's not for me; it's for my students, right? I was getting homework back in. Students were doing better on their tests. So was that coddling? I can't tell you if it was or not. But what I do know is that my outcomes, the goals for even having the homework and doing the test, was that I could mark the fact that they were learning. And those goals were achieved, even though I used different methods than some of my colleagues. And some of my colleagues didn't appreciate the methods that I used. However, I had demonstrated that the methods that I used could give me some outcomes. And so when we think about having conversations about differences and commonalities, talking about, privilege and power, talking about white privilege specifically, we have to ask ourselves, what is my ultimate outcome? What do I want to get out of these conversations? Because that's what will lead us to a level of remarkable success. Because if I'm right about my methods, but my students, the participants, the people that I'm working with aren't growing from my rightness, how effective am I being? So is it better to be right or to be effective? And so as we continue to have these conversations, I want you to think about how is it that we have conversations that are effective conversations? And what is our goal in having the conversation in the first place? I want to show how smart I am, and that's my goal, then I'll use words and terms that work for me. But if I'm actually trying to transfer information or challenge people to think in a different way, then I have to do things that impact how they see the world and cause them to develop skills that I have. If you're the only person that can eat from your tree, I would suggest that you're not a very good farmer, right? So if other people can't benefit from your knowledge and your skills, then what good is it? All right, so we're going to stop this. I'll leave you on this positive note. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Again, we'll try to meet with you between the 10 and 11 o'clock hour, and we look forward to seeing who you become. And my name is Andre Koen. You can check us out on all social media platforms except for TikTok. I got to figure out TikTok. I don't know. Or not. Maybe I just don't do TikTok. Like it's some stuff. Anyway, appreciate you, and